Hey guys, Max here and welcome to another classical analysis. This one was from the Zürich Qualifications Tournament for the Swiss Championships in January 2020, and I played as the black pieces against Miss Brusseau, who at the time had a Swiss Chess Federation rating of 1526. Let's get started. Brusseau began with knight to f3, the Reti opening renowned for being very flexible. Typically black responds with knight to f6, and then white has four popular choices: d4, c4, g3, and b3. g3 and b3 preparing to fianchetto either the dark or light squared bishops, and d4 and c4 simply grabbing space in the center. G3 in this position is the typical Reti response. Here, after knight to f3, I decided to play c5. This is the Zuckertort opening, Sicilian invitation. Of course, named so because after d4, after e4, we would find ourselves in a Sicilian reminiscent position. e4, d6 perhaps, or maybe knight to c6, and then something like d4 would be typical. My opponent continued with g3, preparing to fianchetto with the light squared bishop, and I continue with g6, preparing to do the same with my dark squared bishop. Bishop to g2, bishop to g7, and castles. We can see here the position's main imbalances are the black's extended c5 pawn, which grabs more space in the center, along with the dark squared bishop along this powerful diagonal, as well as the weaknesses it creates on the squares d6 and b6. White, however, is much more developed, with two minor pieces developed and them having castled. I continue with knight to c6. Perhaps better in this position was either to develop the kingside knight via knight to f6, preparing to castle, or also good would be d5 or e5, grabbing space in the center. However, I did play knight to c6, and then my opponent played d3. I play d6, c4, and e6. My opponent plays a3. I play knight g to e7, queen to c2, and castles. This is all very standard opening principles. Here my opponent plays knight to c3, continuing their development. I play a6, and we arrive at what seems to be a sort of critical position for white. They have to decide where to put their bishop. They can try to put it in a few spaces. They could try for g5, they could try for d2, or they could try for f4. F4 is simply invites e5, which is a typical idea in the English, which is what I was trying to emulate. So I would have played that without hesitation, attacking the bishop, making them go away, perhaps back to d2, and then simply continuing with my development, perhaps bishop to f5 or bishop to e6. But then again, white can try for this b4 break that they seem to have prepared with a3, defending that square. Or they could try for more that dynamic kingside advantages, something like h4, perhaps even h3, or maybe another idea would be to expand in the center with something like e4, e3 perhaps a slower move, preparing d4, with this very bolstered and protected pawn chain, also threatening in the future d5, which would grab lots and lots of central space, as well as hitting black's knight. So white has a lot of options here. My opponent decided to play rook to b1, preparing that b4 push. I play rook to b8, preparing the same but symmetrical. We have b4 and b5. b5 is a tactical blunder, because after b takes c5, d takes c5, Knight takes e4 was also, sorry, knight e4 here. Knight e4 here was also good, hitting this pawn. That was an idea I looked at. But yeah, and then simply white takes, and if black takes, then they can take back, and they are up a pawn. Black has a weak king, weak pawn on c5, and white has this, albeit weak pawn on a3, but it is a passed pawn that will threaten promotion. If white does not take back on c5 and instead tries to take c4, then white can simply take, driving the knight back, and then take on, take here, forcing the take back, and then take here, gaining a pawn. It's just up a straight pawn in an otherwise quite symmetrical pawn structure on the c file that is threats to promote. So therefore, b5 is a mistake. Better in this position would be something like knight to d4, perhaps even taking. This gives white a lot of chances, but also black, because now there are imbalances in the position after they take back. Anyways, it would have been a much more interesting game otherwise. However, b5 I decided to play, b takes c5, d takes c5, c takes b5, bishop takes c3, trying to remove the defender of this pawn, but unfortunately it's not enough. Queen takes c3, a takes b5, and queen takes c5. I develop bishop to a6, knight to e5, my opponent is attacking, a very strong move. Knight to d4, rook to e1, rook to b7, which is a blunder. Rook to b7, because after bishop takes b7, I'm down the exchange and a pawn, and soon to be another pawn. e3 kicking my knight away, a Zwischenzug, an intermediate move, intermezzo. Knight f3 check, knight takes f3, bishop takes f3, and queen takes b5. Now, at this position, this is lost. This is easily resignable for black. Black is down the exchange and 2 pawns, very simply lost. I decided to play on and try for some kingside attack, given the weakened light squares around the enemy king. So I played knight to f5, e4, knight to d4, queen to b2, bishop to g4, trying to shuffle around to this h3 square, bishop to g4, rook to e3, e5, a4, f5, queen a2 check, king g7, rook b7 check, king h6, and rook e1. You can see here I'm trying to bring everything over to this side of the board. F4 to block this check that was hitting the king, and king g2. The fatal mistake. My opponent gave me an opportunity to simply win. Because here, after bishop to f3 check, king to f1, queen to c8, white is threatening check and then checkmate, which must be dealt with. So white's response is to take, then after takes back, rook to b1. Rook to b1, providing the king with, protecting the rook and providing the king with an escape square. Then after, say, queen to h3, king to e1, and there is no more mate. The king manages to escape. Even if we try queen to g2, then queen to c4 tightens everything up. This square is still escapable for the king, and although this is definitely in black's advantage, it is not at all won. However, after king to g2, I play queen to c8, taking advantage of it instantly. My opponent, seeing me attacking this rook, very mistakenly tries to defend it, And here I have mate in 7. It's a very simple attacking motif. I put bishop to f3 check, king to g1, queen to h3, and checkmate on the g2 square is unavoidable. White can try and extend it. Bishop takes f4 check, rook takes f4, rook takes h7 check, king takes h7, queen to b7 check, king to h6, queen to h7 check, king takes h7, and then white has nothing more to do. They simply play something like g4, and then queen to g2 checkmate. It was in this position, after queen to c8, queen to b2, bishop to f3 check, and then king to g1, queen to h3, that my opponent resigned the game. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching to the very end. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed, and as always, I'll see you next time.